Now, here's what we know about the situation in West Asia. The Israeli military launched a wave of strikes against nuclear sites in Iran, also targeting Iran's military leadership. Israel struck the Natanz uranium enrichment plant and has killed 6 nuclear scientists. Iran's top military commanders have been killed, including General Hossein Salami, the head of the Revolutionary Guard. Israel deployed 200 fighter jets, striking over 100 targets in Iran, including many in Tehran as well. The Israeli government also declaring a state of emergency. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu justified the military operation and said it could continue as long as necessary. Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei also vowed to take action and threatened that Israel would face severe punishment. Iranian state TV reportedly said residential areas in Tehran were hit and civilians were killed. The state TV also aired footage of Iranians taking to the streets and chanting death to Israel and death to America. Iran has launched about 100 drones against Israel, and the Israeli army says it is working to intercept them. US President Donald Trump has warned Iran to agree on a nuclear deal, saying this could only get worse. This comes after Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Israel acted unilaterally and the US was not involved in the attacks. In a social media post, Trump said there has already been great death and destruction, but there is still time to make the slaughter come to an end. He warned of even more brutal attacks if Iran refuses to strike a nuclear deal, saying things will only get worse. Trump also wrote that he gave Iran a 60-day ultimatum to make a deal, and now the country has a second chance. Meanwhile, other global leaders called for de-escalation in tensions.
The Secretary General condemns any military escalation in the Middle East. He is particularly concerned by Israeli attacks on nuclear installations in Iran, while talks between Iran and the United States on the status of Iran's nuclear program are underway. The Secretary General recalls the obligation of UN member states to act in accordance with the UN Charter and international law. The Secretary General asks both sides to show maximum restraint, avoiding at all costs a descent into deeper conflict, a situation that the region can hardly afford.
Well, it is obviously a rapidly evolving situation. This was a unilateral action by Israel. So I think it is crucial for many allies, including the United States, to work as we speak to de-escalate. I know they're doing that.
Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to discuss the ongoing situation in West Asia. During the call, Prime Minister Modi emphasized on India's concerns and called for the need to restore early peace and stability in the region. Joining us now to take this forward is Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for joining us on the program, Dr. Parsi. Let me begin by asking you, what are Iran's options at this stage?
Well, it very much depends on what capacity they have left, both in terms of military assets as well as the command and control centers that they have. How much of a hit did that take, mindful of the fact that several of the military leaders were killed in these Israeli strikes? It remains to be seen that the reason why they haven't responded yet beyond some of these drone attacks is whether they are trying to regroup or whether they actually have lost most of their capacity of striking back at Israel.
Right. That indeed is an important point. How do you think Donald Trump is supporting Netanyahu at this point? The U.S. is literally warning them that just do it, just sign a deal before things get worse. Nothing will be left. This seems to be a dire warning from the U.S. president.
Well, I think what Trump has done in the last week, that he completely shifted. Earlier on, I think he was sincerely looking for a deal, and then he shifted and has been essentially supporting what the Israelis are doing, probably with some deep coordination as well. His latest comments and tweets seem to be that he's actually taking credit for these attacks, which may be an exaggeration, but nevertheless, it's very unlikely that the Israelis could have done this without coordination with the US and certainly without some form of a green light. But his idea that this will then cause the Iranians to capitulate, I think, is undermined by the fact that he is essentially signaling that he was deeply involved in deceiving the Iranians into believing that he was serious about diplomacy in the last couple of days, whereas in reality, it gave a cover for the Israelis to attack in a way that surprised the Iranians. Given that, On what basis would the Iranians believe that any effort to capitulate actually would lead to Trump delivering on what he's promising the Iranians if they do capitulate? So I think he's undermining his own prospects of getting the Iranians to back down with the manner that he is taking credit for this.
Right. Do you think that Iranians, considering their pride, will even agree to any kind of nuclear deal, even if things get better in the next few weeks?
I find it very unlikely, but again, it all depends on how much of it has been destroyed and how much of it can be resurrected. And again, that what this starts to look like is not a campaign against the Iranian nuclear program, but a campaign to cause regime collapse in Iran, and causing the entire regime to collapse. Not necessarily regime change, because regime change would mean that the Israelis are actually pushing for an alternative government. They're just pushing for chaos here and making sure that the Iranians don't have any government at all. When that happened in Syria, when the Syrian government fell, that's when the Israelis dramatically increased their bombing campaigns and started taking out all conventional military assets that the Syrians had in order to make sure that whoever would take over Syria afterwards would not be able to pose a challenge to Israel. And much indicates that this is also what they would be seeking to pursue in Iran if they're successful in causing these different attacks to eventually lead to some form of a regime collapse in Iran.
Right. Do you think there is any possibility right now of a full-blown war?
Well, if the Iranians respond and their response ends up being effective, then the idea that this has been so successful for Israel is going to change. And then the Israelis are going to start pushing the US to actually get openly involved in the war. And that would likely lead to a conventional regional war in the sense that in that scenario, again, if the Iranians retain that capacity, the Iranians may start attacking US bases in the region if the US is actively involved and openly helping Israel in its attacks.
Right. The question that we would like to ask you, do you think Iran is holding its horses right now because Israel wants a war? We spoke to the Israeli ambassador earlier today, and he told us that Israel had been preparing for this for decades. They felt and they had intelligence that Iran is close to being ready with a nuclear weapon, and that's why this was the best time to attack Iran's military leaders and nuclear facilities. They are ready for the retaliation, they're saying. They're ready for a long haul. So it seems that possibly Israel may be wanting a war. And if Iran retaliates, they would be just feeding into what possibly Israel and even US may be wanting them to do.
Israel certainly wants a war. I mean, what they have done is to start one. And they certainly wanted to expand, and they would love for it to lead to the US being openly involved in it. But the Iranian strategy of holding their horses, as you said, may not be working if it means that the Israelis then will have completely free reign to bomb anywhere they want in Iran for the next couple of weeks. That's a strategy that the Iranians pursued early on. They took a lot of hits in Syria without responding. But this is different because these are not just attacks on Iran, it's on the Iranian capital. The Israelis are bombing apartment buildings because one person lives there that they want to get to, and they're killing scores of people in those apartment buildings. So it is very difficult to see that the Iranians, if they do have the capacity to retaliate, would argue or calculate that it's better for them to show restraint in this type of a scenario.
Right. Could you describe the challenge for Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, and what was the possibility of Iran choking the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, the Iranians certainly would have the capacity of creating challenges there. We've seen, for instance, how the Houthis, without mining the Red Sea, have been able to choke it off because of the manner in which they were shooting anti-ship missiles. And this would, they don't even have to hit the ships. The ships simply wouldn't go through. It wouldn't be worth the risk. It wouldn't be worth the insurance cost. But that is a scenario that only would happen once there actually is a full-blown war between the United States and Iran. Because if the Iranians do this, they will invite direct American attacks on Iranian soil. So I don't see them doing it unless those attacks already are taking place.
Right. In terms of the oil prices, there is a major worry, and we saw oil prices jumping almost 9 to 12% on the back of worries about a larger Middle East war and what will it do to all the oil shipping lines as well. Do you think Iran may want to send a message to the international community, make them uncomfortable by shutting off, closing the Strait of Hormuz? Can they do that unilaterally?
They can, but it comes at great risk. And it's one of those scenarios in which it's one of those tools that I think they would only employ if they're already in a state of all-out war. They are now in an all-out war with Israel, but they're not in an all-out war with the United States. So the question is, would they go in this direction and virtually guarantee that the U.S. would enter the war fully? And there's not a lot of indications that they would do this. What they have stated is that they would target American bases if the United States is openly helping Israel in its offensive attacks. And even if that is happening to a certain extent, the Iranians may want to have some plausible deniability and pretend that that is not taking place, because ultimately they know it is the Israeli aim to get Iran into a war with the US. And they were going to be careful to avoid that trap.
Right. What's your understanding of the kind of damage that has been caused to the Iranian military, their nuclear facilities, and what is the current capacity? If you had to compare the military capacities of Iran and Israel right now, and Israel, we have to keep in mind, is getting US help constantly. So where is Iran in this power balance?
Well, Iran's capacity, of course, is not one that matches that of Israel. But what Iran did have through its missiles, and may still have, is an ability to inflict a severe cost on the Israelis that could make it extremely painful and costly for the Israelis to go forward in this direction. Now, whether that capacity has been destroyed or not remains to be seen. What we're seeing here with them not doing anything on that front may very well simply be because of the high-level personnel that have been killed, and the Iranians need to regroup before they can do anything. Within a week, I think we should have a clearer answer to that question. My apologies, I really do have to run now, but thank you so much.
All right, Trita Parsi, thank you very much for joining us on the program. It was indeed a pleasure talking to you, and of course, a very grave situation there in the Middle East. Time for a short